He ordered a wife for the ranch, but it was his daughter who said, "Can she stay forever?" The morning began with frost on the windows and silence in the kitchen. Elias McGraw stirred the embers in the stove, adding a log of cedar wood. The warmth crept into the room, chasing the cold from the corners. He glanced over his shoulder at the small figure still curled under a quilt on the cot in the next room. Josie, 4 years old, all curls and quiet since her mother passed last winter. She had not spoken much since, but she still watched everything. Josie was still there. Elias moved slowly through the house, setting the kettle on to boil. His motions were practiced, not rushed. Every morning was the same. Feed the horses, check the fencing, boil oats, keep the child warm. He was 38 now, lean, weathered, shoulders wide from years in the saddle. His face bore the traces of grief that did not fade, but it was not unkind. Outside, the wind scraped against the house like dry whispers. There was a knock on the door. Elias opened it to find Samuel Risby, his oldest friend and nearest neighbor, holding a newspaper and 2 tins of coffee. "I brought your beans," Sam said, "and something else." They sat in the kitchen. Josie peeked at them from behind the doorway, but did not come close. Sam unfolded the newspaper and pointed to a section circled in pencil. Marriage arrangements, discreet women seeking honest homes, experience not required. Elias frowned. "I do not need a wife. You need help." Elias. "Someone to mind the child while you work. Someone to keep you from turning into stone," I managed. Sam leaned forward. "I am not saying you fall in love. I am saying you write a letter." There was a long silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Elias took the paper and stared at the words. Then he reached for his coat and pulled out a folded sheet already written. Sam blinked. "You already did it." Elias nodded once. I kept it simple. He slid the letter across the table. Sam read it aloud. "Have a home, a child and work that does not end. If you can handle dust, horse sweat, and silence, I will meet you at the depot. No past, no promises." Sam looked up. "That is not exactly charming." "I am not charming," Elias said. "I am honest." He stood and walked to the mantel. There, beside a faded photograph, lay a small wooden box. He opened it and took out a gold ring, his wife's wedding band. He turned it between his fingers, then walked back to the table and placed it beside the letter. "I will mail it today," he said, "but I will not wear that anymore." Sam's expression softened. "You sure about this?" Elias nodded. "She will not be my wife. She will be someone Josie can hold on to when I am out in the fields." From the doorway, Josie stepped into the light. She looked at the ring, then up at her father. Her eyes were the color of her mother's. Elias knelt before her. "She is not your mama, little one," he said gently, "but she might keep the fire warm." Josie reached out and touched his face, her small hand resting on the stubble of his jaw. Then she nodded once, solemn and brave. Elias rose, took the letter and the ring, and stepped out into the wind. The post office was 3 miles by horseback, and he would ride every inch of it in silence. No, he was not looking for love. Love had already burned once. He only needed someone who could stand beside the ashes and not run from the smoke. Days later, the stagecoach wheezed to a stop in a puff of dust and creaking leather. Barbara Bennett stepped down carefully, one hand gripping the rusted rail, the other clutched around the worn handle of a canvas suitcase. Her dress was plain sun-faded blue. Dust clung to the hem, and her boots were cracked at the soles. She had tied her hair back in a rough bun, a few strands already loose in the prairie wind. She scanned the small depot. Just a crooked bench, a watering trough, and a horse tied off in the shade. No sign, no welcome. And then she saw him, A tall man leaned against the hitching post, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes. His shirt was worn but clean, sleeves rolled up, revealing tan forearms etched with work. He did not move as she approached. "Mr. McGraw?" she asked. He nodded once. "Barbara Bennett." She hesitated, then returned the nod. "I am." They stood like that for a long moment, silence stretching between them like a wire, ready to snap. He took her suitcase without asking. It surprised her. She had expected words, maybe suspicion, maybe disappointment. But he turned without a sound and walked toward the horse. Barbara followed, her shoulders straight but heart tight. They rode without conversation, the wind stirring grit from the trail. The land was wide and brown, hills like sleeping beasts in the distance. Barbara's hands clenched the saddle horn, knuckles pale, her jaw locked shut. But inside her, a storm stirred. She remembered the last face she saw in Wyoming, her husband's twisted in rage, the glass bottle, the screaming, the blood. She had not meant to kill him, only stop him. The letter she wrote to Kansas had been signed with a name. That was not hers. Barbara Bennett had died in a cold cabin that winter. This new woman was built from what survived. When they reached the ranch, the sun was low behind the barn. Josie stood in the doorway holding a wooden doll. She was small, nearly, swallowed by her nightgown, curls falling in every direction. Her eyes locked on Barbara, then flicked to the suitcase. "This is Miss Barbara," Elias said, voice gruff. The girl said nothing, just turned and disappeared inside. Barbara stepped down from the horse, brushing her skirt. "Where should I sleep?" Elias gestured toward the barn. "There is hay in the tack room, warm enough this time of year." She looked at him, just looked and nodded. No protest, no complaint. Later that night, as she unrolled a thin blanket onto the straw, she heard the cry of an owl in the trees. She lay down slowly, bones aching from the ride. The suitcase sat beside her like a gravestone. Sleep did not come easy. Somewhere in the dark, the dream returned. A knock, a scream, shards of glass, blood on her knuckles. She bolted upright with a gasp, heart slamming in her chest. Her hand reached for nothing, just air and straw. A light flickered. She looked up and saw a face at the high window of the barn, Josie. The girl did not speak, just stared with those deep, still eyes. Then she disappeared again into the house. Barbara slumped back onto the hay, chest still heaving. Inside the house, Elias sat at the table, reading by lantern light. When Josie crept in and climbed onto the chair beside him, he looked over. "She is loud," he muttered. Josie shook her head. Elias frowned. "Did she scare you?" Josie hesitated, then climbed down from the chair. She padded to the linen chest and pulled out a small patchwork blanket. Without a word, she walked outside. Elias followed her to the porch and watched as his daughter crossed the yard barefoot, opened the barn door, and disappeared inside. Barbara heard the creak of the hinges. She sat up just as Josie approached with the blanket held, out like an offering. The child said nothing, just set it down beside her, then turned and left. Barbara pressed the fabric to her face and closed her eyes. In the doorway of the house, Elias stood watching. His jaw was tight. He did not like this, any of it. The silence, the softness. He went to the barn after Josie returned to bed, stood in the shadows, watching Barbara sleep, curled around the blanket his daughter had given her. He wanted to believe this woman was strong enough, capable enough, quiet enough. But all he saw was a stranger, a woman with ghosts behind her eyes. And strangers, he had learned, brought trouble. The sky cracked open just after sundown. Rain came heavy and fast, drumming against the roof in loud, uneven beats. The wind howled through the gaps in the window panes, and the smell of wet earth crept into the house. Josie had been quiet all day, more than usual. Now she lay curled in her cot, cheeks flushed with color that did not belong there, her. Breath came in quick, shallow puffs. Elias knelt beside her, one rough hand on her forehead. The heat nearly scalded his palm. "She is burning," he muttered, eyes wide. He stood quickly, knocking the chair behind him. "Josie," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. Her eyelids fluttered, but her eyes did not fully open. Barbara was already in the doorway, hair damp from the barn. Her eyes scanned the room, then the girl. "She is feverish," she said softly. "I can—" "See that?" Elias snapped. Barbara stepped forward. "You have willow bark." Elias blinked. "In the pantry, bottom shelf." She moved swiftly, barefoot, skirts rustling against the wooden floor. In moments, she had a kettle boiling, water steeping with herbs. She crushed between her fingers. "Cloths," she said, not asking. "Where?" "Washroom. Top drawer." He watched as she soaped a rag and placed it across Josie's forehead. Then her hand moved to the girl's wrist, counting beats beneath her breath. "She is sweating." "That is good," Barbara whispered. "Means the fever is fighting." Elias hovered behind her like a storm cloud, helpless, useless, wounded by memories. He remembered the last fever in this house. His wife, pale and shaking, holding Josie in her arms while she herself could barely breathe. That night, death had chosen the mother and spared the child. He had never forgiven it. Barbara dipped another cloth, turned to him. "Hold her legs. She is seizing." "What?" Elias dropped to the floor and gently pressed Josie's trembling legs to the mattress. Barbara cradled the child's head, humming low in her throat. The sound was soft. Not words yet, just rhythm. Something like comfort. Something old. The tremors passed. Josie, stilled, sweat glistening on her brow. Barbara reached for the tea, blew on it, and coaxed a sip between the girl's lips. Then, with Josie resting in her lap, she began to sing. It was a lullaby in a voice weathered and warm, the notes winding like a breeze through tall grass. "Oh, the wind it sighs on Coyote Hill, and the stars lean close and hush so still. Sleep, little one, 'neath the prairie sky. Mama is here, though the world rides high." Elias stood at the doorframe, frozen. He had not heard singing in this house since his eyes blurred. He stepped back slow and silent, leaving them in the flicker of the oil lamp. Out in the hallway, he paced once, then paused at the open window to Barbara's small room. The one he had grudgingly given her the night before. The curtain was crooked, pulled unevenly, letting in cold wind. He reached out and adjusted it gently, as if the fabric were sacred. Then his hand rested on the sill for a long time. The rain softened into a steady drizzle. The fire in the hearth crackled. Barbara stayed with Josie through the night. Near dawn, she moved the girl back into her own bed, tucked the quilt high beneath her chin. Josie's breathing was steady now, her skin cool. Barbara stood in the kitchen, barefoot, still, sleeves rolled up. Her hair had fallen loose around her shoulders, damp with steam. She sat at the table and rubbed her tired eyes. The front door creaked. Elias stepped in from the yard, hat dripping with rain. He did not speak. He walked past her, placed something on the windowsill outside her room, then went into the barn. Barbara blinked. Curious, she crossed the floor and opened the door to her little room. There, on the sill just beyond the glass, sat a tin mug. Steam rose from it in lazy spirals. She opened the window, lifted it gently. It was tea. Still, warm, she turned, eyes landing on the now neatly hung curtain. She smiled just slightly, and for the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach. She felt the wind begin to shift. The market in Dust Ridge was always louder on Thursdays. Wagon wheels rattled over. Dry boards, chickens squawked in cages, vendors barked prices, and children chased dogs through the dust. Barbara stood quietly by the barrels of flour, her basket half full. She kept her head down, sleeves long, voice soft. She had been careful. Always. Careful, but fate was not. From across the street, a voice slithered through the air. "Well, I will be damned," she froze. A man with thinning hair and an old army coat stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "I know that face, or maybe I know that scar." Barbara instinctively pulled her sleeve lower, but it was too late. "You were the one," the man said, voice rising, "from Cheyenne. The woman they said killed her husband and ran." People began to turn, heads tilted, whispers started. Barbara backed away, basket trembling in her hands. Please. But the man sneered. "You thought you could run west and scrub off blood like it was dust." A hand grabbed his shoulder. "Elias. He had come into town for salt and nails. He had not expected this." "She is with me," Elias said coldly. The man glanced at him, unimpressed. "Well, you must not know what you brought home." Elias leaned in, voice low. "You say another word in this street, and I will make sure you cannot speak again." The man scoffed, but backed off. "Your funeral, cowboy." He disappeared into the crowd. Barbara still stood there, pale as bone, lips parted in shock. Elias turned to her. "We are going now." They rode home in silence. That night after Josie was asleep, Elias lit the lantern and found Barbara on the porch. She was sitting alone, hands clenched in her lap. "Talk," he said. Barbara stared out into the darkness. "He was my husband. He drank, hurt me more than once." She pulled back her sleeve. A white, jagged scar ran from her wrist to her elbow. "Some night he came at me with a bottle. I fought back. He hit his head, died before morning." Elias said nothing. "I did not wait for the law," she whispered. "I ran." He looked away. "I changed my name, burned the papers. I never thought anyone would recognize me this far west." Elias's jaw tightened. "So you lied." "I survived." Another silence. Then Elias said, without looking at her, "Josie is not herself around you." Barbara turned. "That is not true. She is quieter, unsure. You are not what she needs." Barbara stood, eyes wide. "You do not believe that?" Elias did not meet her gaze. "I think you should leave." Her breath caught. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "Because of what I did, or because you are afraid of what it means if you let me stay?" Elias stood too, fists clenched. "I do not need love, Barbara," he said, his voice sharp, breaking. "I need silence. I need safety. I need someone who does not bring the past into my home." She stepped back as if slapped. Elias turned and walked inside, the door creaking shut behind him. Barbara stood on the porch, staring at the stars that refused to blink. Later that night, Elias sat by the fireplace, hands resting on his knees, staring into the flames. Josie's blanket was folded neatly on the chair. He reached for it, held it in his hands, and felt a wave of doubt rise like smoke from the hearth. He had seen the way Josie looked at Barbara, the way she had sung to her when he could not, the tea on the windowsill, the quiet presence that had started to feel like peace. And now he had pushed her away. He closed his eyes. "I do not need love," but the words tasted bitter. In the barn, Barbara packed in silence one dress, a brush, a small pouch of herbs. She placed the blanket Josie had once given her on top of her folded coat, pressing it there as if it might stop her chest from breaking open. She did not wake anyone. She did not leave a note, only the sound of the barn door, creaking once. Then again. Then nothing but wind. The sun rose late, veiled behind thick clouds. Josie was the first to wake. She rubbed her eyes, climbed from bed, and tiptoed down the hall. Barbara's door was open. The room was empty. Neat. The blanket. Josie had given her folded gently on the pillow, untouched. She wandered through the kitchen, then the porch. "Barbara!" she called, barely louder than a breath. She walked to the barn. No voice, no warm hum, no footsteps, just cold, empty air. Josie's small chest tightened. She returned to the house, her tiny feet tracking dust on the wooden floor. She crawled onto the chair by the table and stared at the spot where Barbara always sat. The tears came slowly. Then all at once, Elias found her minutes later, curled in the chair, shoulders shaking. He knelt beside her. "What is it, Josie? What is wrong?" She pointed toward Barbara's room. Her voice cracked. "She left." Elias's heart thudded. "She left?" Josie nodded. "Because of you." He stared at her. "What did you say?" "You made her go," she whispered. "You said she does not belong." He sat back, stunned. His hands trembled. Josie slid from the chair, fetched a piece of paper from the drawer, and climbed back up. With a crayon in hand, she began to write slow, shaky letters. Elias watched in silence. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. He picked it up. The letters were uneven, the spelling clumsy, but it struck him like thunder. "Please come back, Mama. Can you stay forever, Josie?" He closed his eyes. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, without warning, he stood. He walked to the back room where a dusty lantern sat on the shelf, an old one, his wife's favorite. She used to carry it through the house after dark, singing lullabies and humming to Josie. He stared at it for 1 second too long, then he grabbed it and threw it against the wall. Glass shattered. The sound rang through the house like a gunshot. Josie flinched. Elias fell to his knees, his face buried in his hands. And for the first time since the grave swallowed his wife, he cried. He saddled the horse in near silence, eyes still red. He rode hard into Dust Ridge, through the depot, past the post office. "Did a woman leave here last night?" he asked the clerk. The man shook his head. "No," Coach passed after dusk. He rode to the boarding house. "Barbara," the keeper said. "No, sir. No one by that name." To the next town, another inn. By dusk, he returned home empty-handed. The wind had risen again, curling through the dead grass like it was whispering secrets he could not catch. He stepped off his horse and went inside. Josie was asleep, curled with her doll. Elias walked to the fireplace, picked up the letter she had written, and held it in, both hands like something holy. He walked to the mantel where a small photograph of his wife sat beside a cracked porcelain vase. He placed the letter beside it. Then he spoke aloud, voice barely audible over the wind outside. "I lost you, Emmeline. Know that. And I tried to lock up everything after you. Tried to keep the windows closed, keep the bed made, keep the world out. And I did for a while. But then a woman with tired eyes and a brave heart walked through our gate and everything changed. She is not you. She never tried to be. But she saved Josie in ways I could not. And somehow she saved me, too. I thought keeping. You meant never loving again. But I was wrong. I kept my promise. Not to hold on to the past, but to keep alive the part of me that you once loved. And she, Barbara, she sees that part, too. I think you would have liked her. Josie definitely does. And, Josie, she chose her. So I ask you now, from wherever you are, can she stay forever?" As he finished the last line, the door creaked open. Josie pattered in barefoot, clutching the same wild flowers. She walked to the small wooden shelf by the hearth, the one with her mother's picture and a faded ribbon tied around a dried bouquet. Without a word, She placed the new flowers next to the frame. She looked at her father. "Do you think Mama likes them?" Elias rose and walked over. He knelt beside her, placed an arm around her shoulders. "I think," he said softly, "she would love them." They stood together, father and daughter, watching the flowers settle beside the old, past and present, grief and grace, two worlds now one. And outside, Barbara hummed gently to herself as she gathered the last of the sheets, the prairie wind carrying her voice far and wide into the open sky, where love still lingered. Some say the West was built by bullets and boots, but stories like this remind us it was also built by hearts that refused to give up, a grieving cowboy, a woman with nothing left but courage, and a little girl who asked, "Can she stay forever?" If this story moved you, subscribe to Legends of the Wild West Stories, where we tell timeless tales of forbidden love, quiet heroes, and hearts that outlasted the dust. Because out here, not all stories were told with guns. Some were whispered in lullabies, in letters, and in love that stayed.